Hey guys, Benj Foreman here. I wanted to do a special video on Israel. Now, I realize that this is totally not related to Idaho real estate. So if you're only interested in real estate in Idaho, then you probably don't want to watch this video, which is totally fine. I totally understand. I'm not looking for a ton of views on this video, but I wanted to address Israel so that you could know that I'm not just ignoring what is happening in the world. It's not just business as usual. It's been heavy on my heart what has happened in Israel over the past week and a half or so. A lot of you know that I have a personal connection to Israel. My wife is Israeli. I ended up living in Israel for 15 years. And so this has definitely been something that has been personal for me. It's been heavy on my heart. So I want to do a video unedited just so you can kind of maybe see a little bit of the personal side of me. And then I also wanted to just address a couple questions which you might have had, and I have a few thoughts on those. So 3 questions I want to talk about. Number 1 is, should we even pick a side in this conflict? Number 2, is the problem in the Middle East actually Israel? Is it the occupation that is causing all of these problems? And you see this in the news a lot. If Israel were to just pull out of the West Bank, wouldn't that solve all the problems? And then number 3, what is the proportionate response that Israel should have in light of these atrocities that we've seen over the past week and a half or so? And then at the end, I'll also briefly talk about what Idaho's response has been to this tragedy here in Israel. So let me first start by saying this. The attack in Israel on October 7th is the worst attack that the Jews have experienced since the Holocaust. I mean, I think the numbers are at about 1,400 right now. So since we have not seen this massive amount of casualties in one day since Nazi Germany 70 some years ago in the Holocaust. So it is momentous, right? It is a huge tragedy, and it is very heavy on Israel's hearts. My brother-in-law is called up to the reserves, all my friends, 2 of my wife's cousins. So it's definitely a personal thing for me, and it's been very heavy on the hearts of everybody, certainly with a connection to Israel, and I think Americans in general, given the close ally that Israel is to the country, to our country, to America. So let me start first with the question of, should we pick a side? I was talking with a friend of mine, emailing back and forth with a friend of mine, and this person was basically saying that we shouldn't really even pick a side. Let's just stay out of the conflict and pray for peace. And I resonate with that in one sense, but I challenge this person a bit too in saying, if you can't pick a side, then you're missing something. Then you don't have a moral compass. If you can't decide who has the moral high ground between Hamas and Israel, you don't have a moral compass. Because there's no comparisons. There's not 2 equal sides. It's not like, well, it's so hard to choose between Hamas and Israel. I mean, when has Israel ever killed babies and beheaded them in their homes? When has Israel ever gone to a music festival and slaughtered 200 music goers and then brought their bodies back into Tel Aviv to a cheering crowd of Israelis? When has Israel ever taken a 90-year-old hostage or a 4-year-old as a prisoner of war, as a hostage, as Hamas has done back in October, or on October 7th? There's no comparison. There's not 2 equal sides. It's not like, oh, it's hard for us to decide who has the moral high ground, so let's just stay out of it. No, one side is clearly reprehensible. One side is clearly trying to kill civilians, and one side is clearly trying to avoid killing civilians. So I don't think we can simply say, well, let's just not pick a side. Let's just pray for peace. Certainly pray for peace. I mean, that's my prayer, is that there would be peace and that there'd be a quick resolution. But if we say, we can't pick a side, then in a sense, we are saying that there's a moral equivalency between Hamas and Israel, and that is clearly, by no stretch of the imagination, the case. So the second question I wanted to address is the problem actually Israel? Is the problem the occupation? And the argument goes like this. You see it in the news a lot. The argument goes like this. If Israel were simply to withdraw from the West Bank, from the Gaza Strip, from the Golan Heights, and give the Palestinians full autonomy, give them an army, then there would be peace. The problem is the Israelis. They're the occupying force, and they are creating an apartheid state. You frequently hear that. But let's just go back in history and think for a second and see if history gives us an indication as to whether or not that would be the case if Israel were to totally withdraw from the West Bank, which, by the way, there's not one Israeli soldier in Gaza. I mean, they're about to go in, but since 2005, there has been no Israeli control of the Gaza Strip. There's no Israeli settlers there. But let's just consider the West Bank for a second. If Israel were to pull out of the West Bank, would there be peace in the Middle East, in Israel? Well, prior to 1967, there was no occupation in the West Bank. Now, you remember in 1967, there was what's called the 6 Days War. Israel was attacked by 5 neighboring countries, by Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and then some Iraqis came as well. And in 6 days, Israel quadrupled the size of their country. They took control of the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula, which they subsequently gave back in the Begin administration in the 80s, the early 1980s. But so prior to 1967, there was no occupying force in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip. And was there peace then? There wasn't. There were the Jews were only in the western part of the country, along the coast, down into the south a little bit, and up in the Galilee. But there was no occupying force in the West Bank, and yet there still was not peace in Israel. The Palestinians weren't satisfied just with the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. They wanted all of Israel. And let me give you a further example. Every year, in the Palestinian calendar, they have a day of memorial, day of remembrance called Yawm al-Nakba, which is the day of the catastrophe. And what that is it's a remembrance, a mourning for the great catastrophe. And that great catastrophe is not Israel taking the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in 1967. That great catastrophe is what? It's actually the Declaration of Independence in 1948, when Israel was declared the western part of the country to be its country. So that shows very clearly that the Palestinians, and I'm not saying every Palestinian, but in general, the Palestinians are not supportive of a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution, and specifically Hamas, particularly Hamas, doesn't support a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. They want just a Palestinian state with zero Jews anywhere in the land of Israel or anywhere. And another example that I can cite is that, and you don't hear this a lot either, is that Israel actually has offered the Palestinians numerous times a Palestinian state. And so the argument goes, if Israel were to pull out of the West Bank and out of the Gaza Strip and give the Palestinians a state, there would be peace. But the Israelis have offered the Palestinians on multiple occasions the West Bank. So in December of 2000, for example, Ehud Barak offered Yasser Arafat 95% of the West Bank, 100% of Gaza, and then for the remaining 5% in the West Bank, he offered to do land swaps for where there were Israeli houses and villages. And Arafat said, no, we want 100% of it, right? We want 100% of of the West Bank, of the Gaza, of the Golan Heights. Well, the Golan Heights, they wanted to give back to Syria. But as I was thinking about that, when in politics do you ever get 100% of what you want? That doesn't exist. That's what politics is all about. Politics is about compromise, about negotiation, about getting the major things that you want, but recognizing that there's probably going to be some concessions that need to be made. But the Arabs time and time again have said, no, we don't want one single Jew in all of our territory. They don't want one single Jew in their territory. You know how many Arabs there are in Israel? There's 2 million Arab Israelis in Israel right now. 2 million. That amounts to about 20% of Israel's citizens are actually Israeli Arabs. So will giving them the West Bank and the Gaza bring peace to the Middle East? I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical of that because it's been offered to them many different times and they've rejected it. And let me give you one final thing to think about. Right now, there are no Israelis in Gaza. I mean, right now they're starting to kind of go in a little bit, but since 2005, they pulled out all of the Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip. I actually visited these settlements just before they pulled out in 2005. There was beautiful farms there. You know, for 30 some years, you had Israelis living in the Gaza Strip. About 7,000 Israelis, and it took about 7,000 Israeli soldiers to guard those Israeli citizens. And so the Israeli government said, hey, it's not worth it for us. Not worth it for us to have this many soldiers protecting this few of Israelis. And so they forcefully uprooted all of those settlements in 2005. And that's when Hamas became the de facto ruling force in the Gaza Strip. They, since then, have been ruling autonomously the Gaza Strip, and there was the chance, you know, for Gaza to become like a Singapore, Middle Eastern Singapore, but instead it's actually just become a corrupt area that has lobbed literally tens of thousands of rockets into the land of Israel. So saying that the occupation is the culprit or the reason why there's no peace, I think, is not being honest with history. There are no Israelis in Gaza right now. And yet that's where the problems came from. So what is the solution? What is the solution to this problem in the West Bank? And that's mainly the sticky part, because I think there's about 400,000 settlers that live in the West Bank. And honestly, I don't know. My hunch is that if Israelis, and just in talking with people in Israel, if Israelis were 100% certain that giving up the West Bank would bring long-lasting peace, my hunch is that there would be enough Israelis to support that, to give the Palestinians their own state in the West Bank. The problem is that Israelis know that that's not the case. They're not that naive. They know that simply giving land for peace does not work. That was the principle that Bill Clinton established back in the mid-90s, land for peace, the Oslo Accords. But that policy has only caused more and more problems in the Middle East. So what's the solution? Honestly, I don't know. And there's been a lot of people that have tried to come up with a solution. I remember back in 2002, I think it was, George Bush's Secretary of State, Colin Powell, came to the country, and there was this big thing. You know, they shut down the roads and the city. You couldn't move around because of a security situation. And in the news, they were saying if there's one person that can bring peace, it's this guy. You know, it's Colin Powell. And Colin Powell came and went, and nothing changed. Obama came and went. Nothing changed. So the actual solution, I think, is the Prince of Peace. And I really believe that. But from a political point of view right now, I don't know what the solution is. What I do know, though, is that Israel has the right to defend itself and a moral obligation to do so. That's the purpose of a government. The government is there to protect citizens. And they should do that by trying to have the least amount of civilian casualties as possible, which I think it's doing. But that leads, I think, to the third question I wanted to talk about is, what is the proportionate response for Israel? What's morally acceptable? What's the proportionate response? Now, some people might say Israel shouldn't do anything. And you might think, well, doesn't Jesus say turn the other cheek? So peace should be, a peaceful response should be the proper response for Israel right now. Now, that might sound good. But I think what you need to realize, though, is that there is a difference between what an individual can do and what a government can do or should do. There's a difference between personal and national action. I mean, the New Testament also says in 1 Peter chapter 2 that the purpose of the government is to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. So there's things that the government can do that individuals can't do. I mean, an individual can't just take the law into their own hands. I can't, say, hey, my neighbor has wronged me, so I'm just going to take him and put him in a closet for a year as punishment. I can't do that. But the government can do that, right? There's certainly some things that the government can do and should do that individuals can't do. And that's, I think, the distinction that needs to be made. Turn the other cheek is for the individual, but from a government's perspective, the point of the government is to look over its citizens, to protect its citizens, and to watch over them. And I think most people recognize that. But what you'll frequently hear in the news is people will say, well, Israel needs to have a proportionate response. And what they mean by this is that, let's say Hamas fires one rocket. Israel can't fire 10 back. That's not proportionate. Now, that's a misunderstanding of the principle of proportion, which I'll talk about in just a second. But let's just carry that faulty logic to its conclusion for just a second. Let's just say that is what this principle of proportion is. What would be the proportionate response that Israel should have towards what happened on October 7th? Well, if we wanted perfect symmetry, then Israel should go to a music festival in Gaza City and should find exactly 200 innocent teenagers or 20-year-olds and go to exactly 22 Palestinian villages and murder exactly the same number of women in those villages and murder exactly the same number of music festival attendees and rape the exact number of people that were raped at the music festival and carry their bodies back, the exact number of bodies, and abduct the exact number of children and Holocaust survivors. I guess they wouldn't be Holocaust survivors, but old people. I mean, that's ridiculous. Right? That's actually absolute lunacy. If you think there should be symmetry between the responses, Israel's not going to respond in the same way that Hamas acted towards them. That would be immoral, and the world would justly be outraged at that. That's wrong. You can't just murder innocent people like Hamas did. That's what Hamas did. So if you want symmetry, in theory, that's what Israel should do, but that's ridiculous. No sensible person would believe that. No sensible person has said that. But what people frequently think, though, is that the proportionate response is a numbers game. So if 1,400 Israelis were killed, which is an insane number of people, I am still shocked that that's the number. But if 1,400 Israelis were killed, then, should there be 2,000 Palestinians that are killed or Hamas people that are killed? But that's not how the principle of proportion works. It's not a numbers game. Wars are actually meant to be won, and they're meant to be won decisively. It's not like you fire one rocket, I can only fire 2 back. No, you have the right to fire 1,000 rockets back so long as they're directed toward military targets. But here's what I learned from Alan Dershowitz, actually, from his podcast, which I thought was very helpful. I wanted to share it with you. The principle of proportion actually relates to and here's how he defined it. It's the anticipated civilian casualties should be proportional to the value of the military target. So let me repeat that again. The principle of proportion states this: the anticipated civilian casualties should be proportioned to the value of the military target. Now, obviously, that's fairly subjective. I mean, very subjective. How do you know what the value of a military target is? But the way that it works is like this. Let's say there are 100 Hamas terrorists hiding in a house. And as the Israelis, are gathering their intelligence, they realize that there are 2 civilians in the nearby area that are anticipated to be casualties of the war, to be killed if the Israelis were to take out that building. Is that a proportionate response to take 100 militants out along with 2 civilians? Now, that's a valuable military target, because 100 terrorists can cause a lot of harm to Israel. So that's the calculus that needs to be made. And is there a cut and dry solution? Is there always a number? No, because there's always going to be different situations. But let's say the opposite is true. Let's say that there were 2 terrorists in a house with 100 civilians. Would it be morally right for Israel to take out that building and, kill 100 civilians with 2 terrorists? And it's always easier to see the principle played out when you look at the extreme. So let's say that there was 1 terrorist and 1,000 civilians. Well, you can't do that, obviously. That's not proportional. But if there's 1,000 terrorists and 1 civilian, then that seems to be the right proportion. And then if you work from the extremes, you can sort of narrow it down and clarify what the right number should be. And I don't have the answers to what it is exactly, but that's the calculus that Israel needs to make, right? That is the math, in a sense, that Israel needs to work through when thinking about what a proportionate response should be. And that's what Israel actually does. Israel is so frequently blamed that, they say, oh, Israel just indiscriminately kills civilians and they purposefully kill babies. You hear on the news, what about the 500 babies that were killed in Gaza last year? Nobody was up in arms about that. That's sad. It's tragic. It totally is. But the fact is that Israel's not targeting babies. Hamas is hiding behind babies. They use human shields, and they are killed. The babies are killed as a sad fog, in the fog of war, right? They're a sad tragedy of war. But Israel's not targeting babies. Who is targeting babies? Hamas. We just saw that on October 7th. And, it's not even in Israel's best interest to target civilians. They are under such scrutiny by the rest of the world that even if for some reason, and there's not, but let's say there was some reason that it was advantageous for them to kill civilians, politically it wouldn't make sense, because they would have such outrage against them that there would be so much pressure on them to stop their campaign that they wouldn't be able to function politically. So it doesn't even make sense politically. So what's the proportionate response? I think the proportional response should be calculated based on the anticipated ratio between civilian casualties and the value of the military target. And that's hard. And I'll be totally honest. It's hard. It's hard to get that right. Sometimes they fail. But what Israel does not do is target civilians, and they try hard not to kill civilians. And if Israel at some point were to purposefully bomb a hospital or purposefully bomb a school and purposefully harm civilians, I would condemn that, because that's wrong. You can't target civilians, but that's not what Israel is doing. They are making a calculated they're making a calculated response based on what the anticipated civilian casualty will be relative to the value of the military target. And let me finish with this. What has Idaho's response been? I was pleased to see that Brad Little last week ordered the flags to be flown half-mast here in Idaho. Here's what he said. He said, Idaho stands firmly with our ally Israel. We wholly support Israel's defensive actions against the terrorist actions of Hamas. So I was pleased to see that Brad Little is definitely on the right side here. He's definitely supporting Israel and their defensive actions. And both of our senators also issued a statement condemning Hamas and supporting Israel. Jim Risch, for example, says Israel has every right to respond to these attacks. It has the unequivocal support of the U.S. We stand shoulder to shoulder with our Israeli partners. And Mike Crapo, same thing, expressed support for Israel. So I was pleased to see that both of our senators and the Idaho governor were clear-headed about this. There's not two sides here. It's not like, well, we can't decide as to who the aggressor is here, who has the high moral ground here. Clearly, evil is on the side of Hamas, and I don't think that we should equivocate when it comes to choosing a side. So hopefully that was helpful for you. It's been Israel's been on my heart, definitely in my prayers, and just wanted to share that with you. Let me know what you think, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.